Good evening and welcome to Reasonable Doubt. I'm Dan Gerson.
And I'm Cynthia Henley. This is a live call-in show. That means you call in, and we're going to talk about issues that surround the criminal justice system.
Very good job.
Always say that me, as a member of the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association, we're one of the co-sponsors, along with Mr. Gerson, who allowed us to join him a couple of years.
Even when you're not here, I mentioned that you are aren't you the president?
I'm the president. Sorry, guys. And through May, I'm still your president.
And that Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association does co-sponsor the show. Well, I tell you what, the news, national, local, is totally filled with criminal justice issues today, Cindy.
Lots. In fact, we were talking about some of the articles earlier today. And one of my pet peeves, Dan, as I told you, is I am sick and tired of reading about prosecutors who hide evidence, get convictions on people, and then later we find out this gentleman from North Carolina, someone here locally, 10 years later, they hid evidence. Why?
And didn't I read about a case yesterday where Judge Hoyt, the federal judge, had to overturn the punishment in a capital murder case because of some statements that were made about the defendant that were very inconsistent by the co-defendant witnesses.
Co-defendant, that's exactly right. Why does this keep happening?
Well, what I don't understand is why did it take Judge David Hittner, who's a federal judge, to rule that a sleeping lawyer was a violation? Why does it take a federal judge, Kenneth Hoyt, to make a ruling that it was illegal to withhold evidence? Why don't we ever get our Court of Criminal Appeals, our courts of appeals making these rulings?
Well, you want me to give you my quick opinion on that?
Okay.
That's because our state court judges are elected. And what do they do every election? I don't care whether they are criminal judges, they are divorce lawyer judges, whether they are appellate judges, they get up and say, I'm tough on crime. And they darn sure don't want to turn over a capital murder conviction and say that this guy didn't get a fair trial. How many times do you see that happen? It hardly ever happens.
I know it. And you know, one of the things we've talked about on this show before is that in a case, there's law. I love the language which says whether it's by a wink, a nod, or a handshake, if there's a deal with a witness to pay him money, to drop his cases, it's supposed to be put out on the table. And I have tried cases, and you've tried cases, where it was made clear, and the juries overlook it half the time anyway.
Half, probably 3/4 of the time. Why don't they just turn it over?
Right, because the jury says, well, it takes a rat to catch a rat, so what's the problem? And yet we keep getting these cases where federal prosecutors hid $1 million payment to a guy, or David Adler's case where they hid the fact that they had evidence the man was working for the CIA as he said he did, and they hid it for 20 years.
You know, I don't understand. If you're going to prosecute someone and take away their liberty, and you guys need to talk about this stuff, call in, let's talk about it. You're going to take away their liberty. Why don't you lay it out on the table and then let 12 people of our citizens decide, is what we have enough to convict? We live in the same society our prosecutors do. I don't want to be, and we talked about this, I don't want to be living with a bunch of rapists and robbers and murderers. I don't. But at the same time, we all have constitutional rights. Let's have a fair trial.
But you know what? And this is just went through my head. This is an analogy I'm going to make. It's sort of like greed in a way, because the prosecutors pretty much have it made anyway. They get convictions in 90% of the cases. They're generally prosecuting the bad guy, and it's the cop who's testifying for the state, and everybody wants to be on the side of the good in the state. So it's really sort of their game anyway that we have to fight uphill. And so the analogy, I'm going to make a big leap here, it's sort of like these corporations, like this Jeff Skilling. Why couldn't Enron have just gone ahead and done it legitimately? And I guess it's because of greed. You know, you get in a position of power and you want it to be your way. So now we've got Jeff Skilling today doing his perp walk.
How about that? We talked about, you said you didn't appreciate the perp walk, and I said, you know what? A lot of these guys would be sitting in prison without a bond that they could even make if they weren't doing that perp walk that Jeff Skilling's made.
Well, I agree with you to some extent, but I also feel like in a white-collar crime, a person with no criminal history, for the almost 30 years that I've been a lawyer, typically you have an arrangement with the prosecution, because usually you know that they're being prosecuted eventually, and you say, look, call me if you need them to. Well, they did do that. The difference was that call you, and we would take them down to the magistrate or the marshal and process them through. The only difference is now they take a 30-minute, a half-hour trip to the FBI office so that they can be put in cuffs and put on camera.
Well, and of course, each one of the guys have had to do that so far in this case.
It's all about the camera, right?
It's all about the camera. But again, look how much time it's taken to prosecute these dadgum cases. And so they're having to try to save face, in my opinion, about why it's taken so long. So they want to say, oh, look what we did. Look what we've got going for you. And that's part of why they're doing it.
I like the fact that it's taken a long time, because you can see how they had to slowly build this case. because Fastow wouldn't give in until he was cornered, and then the dominoes would topple one at a time. So it really makes sense when you think about it.
Well, I don't like to ever give a lot of credence to the prosecution side, but I'll give them this. They didn't just jump in there and start indicting everybody left and right and then worry about the proof and whether they had it. They've worked the case from the beginning, and they've slowly built it up. And that's why we didn't have a lot of people get prosecuted quickly.
Right.
And even they were saying it's going to be very hard for jurors to even understand the indictment and skilling. It's going to take some very good and knowledgeable people to explain it.
Well, see, the problem with white-collar cases, from prosecuting them and defending them, in my opinion, is that a lot of times it's tough to say what's a crime. I mean, Martha Stewart, to me, is a very close case. I mean, you're going to say that she committed a crime because she lied to try to make her company's stock stay up. I mean, that's sort of a large leap.
Well, actually, see, and that's the backdoor way on her, because that's not what they were first looking at. Had she had not told the lies, there wouldn't be a problem, because how many of us think that that's okay? You get a call, are you supposed to go, oh wait, I'm not supposed to get this kind of a call? How would you even know that kind of thing? Not that lack of knowledge is a defense, but she shouldn't have lied.
Right, but I'm saying it's sort of a leap. So here's where I'm going with this. Everybody thinks that Jeffrey Skilling is a huge villain. You know, he took $50 or $100 million out of Enron.
Well, apparently he lied to Congress, but go ahead.
He's living over in almost a $5 million house. He left just when things were getting funky and had an excuse that he left for personal reasons, which made no sense. So he's a perfect villain. But let's stop for just a minute and talk about, the presumption of innocence. What if he's really not guilty? What if he didn't manipulate all these things? What if it was a business deal? Like back in the days of the savings and loans, sometimes it was just the way business was done and things were going under.
What if he found out about it or realized what was happening and he left for those reasons and called them personal reasons,
Right.
and we're convicted him before we give him a trial?
That's sort of what I'm saying. And I mean, I don't find him any more sympathetic than anybody else in the public does. There was a lot of harm done. I mean, you and I have to assume that Fastow has been thoroughly debriefed and told them things that would lead them to believe that he did have more knowledge.
Of course, he has a good monkey to be trying to get off his back, too. The more that he helps, the better off his situation is. We all know how that works. Fastow, yes.
Which is something I've mentioned on here before, and nobody's really been able to answer this question for me. Maybe I need to ask his lawyers. Everybody says because he cooperated, he got a 10-year sentence. But as you and I know, typically you get one sentence, and then if you cooperate, there's a thing called Rule 35, that the sentence could be lowered later. I'm assuming that he's still subject to Rule 35, and he may end up with fewer than 10 years.
We've talked about that, in fact, with some other people that we've had on the show, and no one knew the answer to that, which leads you to believe that that is not a cut-off avenue, that it is a potential that he can get a lowered sentence.
Well, certainly he's legally entitled to it if the government moves for it.
Sure. Well, I guess the question was that something that was contemplated when they made their agreement or not? But you know what? It wouldn't be that hard. We could haul ourselves over there and look at the plea agreement, because it would be in there if it said no. Yeah,
or maybe we'll get one of those lawyers on here. I've had, I think before you were on the show with me, Ron Woods, a former U.S. attorney, on the show.
Right.
And I noticed that he was one of Skilling's lawyers. And the other thing I thought was interesting, they had a crew of lawyers, like 4 of them.
Who else around here? I didn't.
Well, they weren't around here. They were.
Okay.
One of them hired some, I guess, big name lawyer. But what was interesting to me was
of course,
that,
Dan Gerson's a big name lawyer.
What was interesting to me was that, was that they had the person doing all the talking was this Daniel Petrocelli, who's the Los Angeles lawyer that sued O.J. civilly.
Okay.
And he's obviously a very media savvy lawyer. And I thought it was interesting that they have this guy out there up front and doing all the talking.
That's interesting. Around here, that I don't see how that would be very helpful.
Well, I guess what it is it's sort of like when this lawyer, William Ginsburg, was in the Monica Lewinsky case, and they said he didn't really know how to handle himself with the media, and it was bad for the case, and they got somebody else. And I mean, Ron Woods, for example, is a taciturn sort of a person. He's not a real...
Well, I mean, Ron has a very flat personality.
Right.
He's a very smart guy. He's very aggressive. I actually had a civil case that involved him where he's trying to depose my client, and he just piled on her. So you're right, he's not the kind of person that would come across very well in the media.
He's not the kind of guy to be on TV spewing all this stuff about my client's innocent, and He's not that kind of a mouth.
But you know what? Houston really doesn't accept bringing in strangers around here. I mean, honestly, you and I know, you get the Mike Ramseys, the Dick DeGuarans, and our local big-time people who our local people like. Why would they not bring in someone around
you know,
here?
I have seen, as I read through the
Of course,
names,
we know why Mike and Dick aren't in here, but anyway, go ahead.
as I read about the names of all these people that are, these lawyer names that are representing everybody from Glisson to Skilling to Causey to these people, most of these are names that I don't know that I think are from out of town. They're
Most of them are.
Washington, D.C. lawyers or
Right.
whatever. And I mean, hell, I've tried cases all over the country, so I guess I can't say they don't do well here because I haven't really witnessed a lot of trials that they've had.
Well, that's because they haven't had any.
You think?
Not around here.
Well, some lawyers must come into our federal courthouse and try
Not
some
too
cases.
many. I mean, honestly, if you go down there and watch, it's a lot of the local lawyers. In fact, we had a local lawyer named Cheryl Diggs today. I think I put that out on our listserv. HCCLA has a little discussion listserv, and she got a not guilty on a drug and a conspiracy case.
Where was that?
Whose court? Judge Sim Lake's court.
No kidding.
And you know those federal acquittals are few and far between. So
Very few and far between.
very far, because as we both agreed earlier on, usually the government does a pretty good job of shoring up their case before they ever bring it to actually charges or trial.
Well, that's true too, and I guess when we started the show tonight, we're sort of putting down the state system because they seem to let the DA get away with things where the federal judges seem to overturn these, at least state matters, when they come up to them. Maybe they protect their own when federal cases are appealed. But actually, people need to know our state system provides a lot more protection for an individual than our federal system. For example, why is it harder to win a federal case? Well, one reason is because you don't get to talk to the juries like we do in state court.
Well, okay, let's back that up.
Okay.
The law says we have more protection. Do you think we have more protection? I
In
don't.
state court, well, we have things like an accomplice witness rule.
Where you have to corroborate your accomplice. Where in state court, if I came in and said Dan Gerson delivered 5 kilos of cocaine and they believed me,
In federal court, that's all you need.
then you lose.
Right.
There it is. But it doesn't work the same in state court.
Another thing is that oral confessions are admissible in
right,
federal
in
court,
federal
or in
court.
state court they have to be, in most circumstances,
Either
written or recorded.
recorded or written. True.
And what's interesting about it, if you know history of Texas, is that we have this tradition of populism in this state, sort of like we had. This is civil law, but we had a protection against getting a loan on your homestead, equity loans, until what, 2
Forever,
years
yeah.
ago?
Yeah.
So this state has always, at least since Reconstruction or whatever, we've had these sort of protections. And I know there are more if we think about them. But in addition to things that aren't really written, that are just sort of policy and habit, for example, in federal court, you don't really have a right to take a juror up to the judge during selection and
Say, this guy isn't being fair, Judge. We need to talk to him and see what his problem
right.
is.
Now, most of the judges will let us do that because of tradition. And so there are things like that, 5 minutes to talk to a jury as opposed to...
To
the law-
20?
Well, the law in Texas at least says you have a right to ask everybody.
See, but you know what? There you go. That's the problem. On its face, in every judge, we have 22 felony judges, we have 15 misdemeanor judges. I'm just talking about in criminal courts.
In Harris County.
In Harris County. On its face, it looks like we have a lot of protections. But you know what? With the judges we have now enforcing the laws, we don't. We don't have squat because they don't give us anything. You know, I tried this case the other day, 20 minutes to pick a jury. Who can pick a stinking jury in 20 minutes?
Well, I'm assuming you were able to extend it because you probably had enough questions that you could extend it.
I did a good job in protecting my record and all of that, but at the same time you get cut off, and unless you can show harm, you know that, they changed the law on that, you have to show that you were harmed. Unless it was a constitutional right given to you, you have to show harm. How can you show harm? For one thing, in Texas, you can't even have a juror provide an affidavit or give any testimony saying what they were thinking or what they discussed.
But you can at least say that there were subjects that you wanted to discuss and you weren't allowed to reach those subjects with that person.
And then that's talking about jury selection. But look, I am sorry. We both know, or maybe I know and you don't know this, but cops lie all the time. And very few judges in our system are willing to take the step forward and say, you know what, that sounds like bunk to me and I'm not buying it. They don't do that here.
They don't do that.
I will say Joan Campbell did this the other day in a case. Apparently, this is what I heard. This is strictly rumor, but I heard that the testimony was that the guy was driving down the road in his car and popped a rock into his mouth, and the cops testified they were coming towards him and could see him do that, and that Judge Campbell didn't buy it. Okay, that's what I heard. And Judge Campbell tends to be one of those who's not going to be very quick to grant a motion to suppress, so I give her kudos for that. But you know, that doesn't happen very much. We've talked about this before. I'm sorry to see Judge Ted Poe leave. I am.
Yeah, so am I.
I am very sorry, because that man had learned a lot and he wasn't buying it. Judge Mike McSpadden is the same way. He's not buying all the BS that's being sold. You know what's scary about that? You and I both know Ted Poe and Mike Spadden weren't exactly the most liberal thinkers we had sitting on the bench 5 years ago.
When they started, of course, 20 years ago, they were two of the most conservative.
They were. And they still are fairly conservative, but not compared to what we have sitting up there today.
Well, what Ted Poe and Mike McSpadden have is integrity. And it's an issue of integrity. You have to.
But it's not just integrity, Dan. It's position assurance. Those two men are not going to be beaten by anybody running against them.
That's very true, and we've talked about this 100 times, that when everybody was a Democrat in the early days, it's not that Democrats were better than Republicans necessarily, but they were secure for life, which maybe Republicans are today.
They're pretty secure right now.
So they probably are in a position to not have to worry about the whimsy of the voters.
But they don't care. Look, they love to. Again, we're going to get back to that, like divorce court judge. I'm tough on crime. What do you mean you're tough on crime? That has nothing to do with you. Well, you know what? Any judge who says that ought to be brought down and said, hello, what do you mean you're tough on crime?
Cindy, you're tough on judges and tough on lying cops. Let's take a call. Good evening. You're on Reasonable Doubt.
Good evening to you both. Y'all sound real good today. You're making a lot of sense.
Okay.
And I'm calling because of that officer, that Metro police officer that stopped the cab driver, and just fortunately enough, the cab driver recorded all of his racist attitudes and racist words.
What should happen to that man?
Thank you for that call. I appreciate you bringing this up.
What do you think should happen to that man?
Okay, he should be fired.
Immediately.
But the captain should be fired, because over 10 years ago, they told him that this was a racist police attacking black men, and as if we were the Taliban or Al-Qaeda on the street.
I agree with you, and you know what? I bet if you went back and look at the history of his arrest, you would notice a racial undertone to the history of this man's prosecutions and arrests.
Well, I'm not going to defend him. I feel like he should be fired too. But what I read today, though, is the thing that they had him documented. He probably did a lot of stuff that wasn't documented. But the thing they had him documented on was saying racial things at some meeting somewhere. It wasn't during arrests.
And you know what? He didn't say it as if it were the first time. And this is the reason why, when you talk about the Taliban or what Saddam Hussein does, look at what the black man goes through every day in America.
I could not.
It's far worse. 400 years.
I could not.
Nonsense.
I could not agree with you more. I've always said that young black men in Houston, Texas, live in a police state. In my neighborhood, if a white woman wants to go get some exercise and walk down the street, nobody bothers her. If a black young man wants to walk down the street in his neighborhood, he might get pulled over for walking off the sidewalk or down the street the wrong way.
Look, we always joked. How many times have we said, what's the probable cause? Being young and black and out at night. That's probable cause to stop a black man.
And you can carry a rifle with you. Now, I would stop coming up Fanning, and the police, they took the shotgun off the back seat and put it in the trunk. And they asked me, why are you carrying it? I say, officer, I'm not being smart, but I don't see not one police out here without a gun. So if it's tough on the police, just think about when it's on the citizens. And even if we obeying the law, it's like, hey, what are you doing with the gun? Even if you have the permit to carry a gun, it's like, hey, if you stop by the wrong police, like that young guy that was shot up there on Scott Street by that Burger King, he had his security guard uniform on.
Well, I don't think I would give that reason for why I had the shotgun. I might say that I wanted to have it to protect myself against the same bad guys that the police were protecting us against.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I meant to say if I didn't say it.
I thought you said that I thought you were saying that you're carrying a gun, Mr. Policeman, so I'm going to carry one too.
No, it is for protection. A gun is for protection. It's not to intimidate or anything like that badge that a lot of white officers use. And they got some real crooked black ones out there.
Well, I was going to say, the black officers tend to be, I stepped up on top of you.
I have heard.
You got black lawyers that prosecuted that boy, and he knew that the DNA evidence wasn't his. So, they've got a lot of blacks that are no good. But just think, this guy was on that force, on the Metro Police Force, for 10 years. That captain needs to go, and his immediate officers, including that racist officer, and I don't know who's going to do it, but if the mayor were to step in, I think it would show the citizenship of Houston a great deal as to look forward to a future here. And thank you both.
Thank you
Y'all
very
been
much.
Cordial.
Thank you.
I predict that man will be fired.
I do too. You know what? How many times have I said this? I think every stop ought to be recorded. I think every warrant execution ought to be recorded. You know what? Then we'll put a stop to this stuff. We won't have officers doing that kind of stuff. It's kind of funny. Every time we see a video, we see cops doing what they aren't supposed
Well,
to be doing.
it's sort of like Rodney King. Of course, nowadays, people are showing me every fountain pen just about's got a camera in it, and their laptops have videos on them. And
their phones.
phones. So, yeah, a lot of more of this is going to come
Hey,
out.
the cops need to take notice. You may be being recorded. You better do this the right way.
Yeah, because the only times we really see them getting prosecuted is when they are recorded. I think with that officer dead, the way he spoke to that man was so reprehensible. And I was sort of like this fella here. I was a little offended that his chief didn't speak in a little harsher terms about it, and that he even tried to defend him.
Should have said this shouldn't be happening. Well, there was also that justice of the peace recently who was a Hispanic man.
Right.
Who was making comments as people came into the jail, and finally somebody had had enough of it and turned it in. That man knew he was being recorded. That's how bad it was for him.
Well,
He
they
thought
get
he could
used
just
to
do
it,
what he wanted.
because they had the same thing in the South Texas jail a few years ago. They'd be beating up the prisoners on video. They just get used to it being there. Let's take another call, Cindy. Good evening. You're on Reasonable Doubt.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, you have to be. The cameras can be everybody's friend, but you don't want them to be able to turn them on and turn them off and know exactly which angle they're pointing at. If you're going to have them, you should have lots and lots of them.
I think there are lots of them out there these days.
I know, and you can't stop it, just like you can't uninvent a gun.
Look, I think officers ought to have to record every stop. You could put in a long play tape and record every stop you do during your 8-hour shift.
But just like that, I mean, we can also talk about, scapegoats or examples, I think is one of the hot topics of the day.
Well, I'm like scapegoats. Scape them up.
I want to be careful about, judges and DAs and police being hypocrites. I want to watch these guys too. If they're in charge of enforcing laws, I want to watch them just as much and make sure, I don't want, just the cleanest of clean on there. I want real people there. But, we have to be careful because our system is kind of turning into guilty until proven otherwise.
Turning into? Are you kidding?
It was probably always that way. I mean, I was a kid in Houston in the 50s and 60s. I didn't exactly hang out at the courthouse. But I have a feeling that justice probably wasn't a hell of a lot better down there in those days, especially for minorities.
Well, actually,
one of the ways also to
think
clean
you
that
could
up
buy
is
justice
real
in.
follow through. I mean, really finding out, all the aftermath. One of the interesting things that I would like to see: has there ever been a debate for judges before they got elected?
Good question. Let's talk about that, Cindy.
I don't think there has been. Now, I know that the district attorneys who have run in the past have debated a little bit.
Yeah,
but
we
there actually
cover
was
it.
one sponsored over there at South Texas.
Yeah, we covered it right here on the show before you joined us. Adam and I went over with Gary Paulin and David Jones and covered the debates, which were the Republican candidates.
I think Randy Schaefer participated
was
and
one of the-
questioned him. He was very good because he's a very bright person. And
Yeah, he did. A few people asked him questions, and we did the commentary. It was a lot of fun, by the way. But in terms of judicial candidates, it's strange enough that judges are elected. To have them debating would just seem even stranger, I think.
debate what?
And I'll tell you what else. In a small town, like, our friend Wendell Odom, back when Houston was a smaller town, and his dad, Wendell Odom Sr., was a judge, or Myron Love, people knew these names, people knew who they are. Cindy and I are board-certified criminal lawyers, and I don't even know who half the people are that are running for these criminal courts when they run, especially courts of criminal appeals and things. These criminal judges wield a lot of power over particular individuals, but they're basically almost anonymous.
That's true. They do. And you were talking about that, like with the Court of Criminal Appeals. I really encourage people, don't vote if you don't know who you're voting for. If you have someone that you trust to give you advice, which I've said this before, and I do because I'm very active with the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. I'm also on that board. But we have people who evaluate and say this person does this and this person does that. You know that there are no judges right now on the Court of Criminal Appeals that are going to reverse every case. They're not going to even reverse a very large portion of the cases.
Well, most of them don't even look like they even read the cases with any sense of justice or fairness or following the law anymore.
What drives me crazy, Dan, is when we have law and it's very clear this is the law, and they'll work every way they can to get around that piece of law, and that really, really
It's
bothers
wrong.
me.
And you know, even when I started, when we had a more balanced or more liberal Court of Criminal Appeals, the percentage of cases that they reverse has always been very small. It's never been like
No.
they open the floodgates to the jails. But when you read these cases today, and people will have the most meritorious defenses or horrific jobs that some sleeping lawyer did or something, and they will just rubber stamp the conviction and under any stretch of the imagination. It's just wrong.
Well, what really, one of the examples now is we have a lot of these rape cases. Say a child accused some man, her stepfather or some other man, of sexually assaulting her. And you come to find out years later, the girl comes forward and says, it really didn't happen. My mom pressured me, my aunt, my cousin, whatever, and it wasn't true. And you have judges, this actually happened in Galveston, I know of a specific case, but you have judges that are on the district court saying, all right, I find that this man should get a new trial. And then you've got the Court of Criminal Appeals saying no.
There might, you know, like they did it in a case where they said, well, the DNA proved this guy's semen wasn't the semen in this woman, but he may have been there with the other guys.
There were three other guys, and one of the other guys was a depositor, and he wasn't.
He was wearing a condom or he pulled out.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, these are serious. People do not realize how serious these cases are. You know, you have to register as a sex offender for the rest of your life in most of these cases, even if you get out of prison or you just get a probation. So they're very serious situations. But what we were talking about was the fact that the courts are so reluctant to even overturn any cases whatsoever. It makes the paper. Let's talk for just a second about the guy that got death today.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Oh, that's a terrible
We
case.
have 2 minutes left.
Gerald Bork apparently is
yeah.
a true believer, just from reading everything he says and from reading some of the stuff Robert
Every time I
Barr
saw him
says.
on TV, it was going, this guy's innocent.
Yeah, well, I didn't read him saying innocent, but I've read a lot of mental retardation, which I'm not sure what the evidence was. Do you know?
Just something about this little baby was brutally killed, and it's questionable whether the mother did it or allowed the boyfriend to do it. That's all I know.
But there were bite marks. But one of the issues in the case was mental retardation, which is a big issue right now. And while we're giving kudos, we've talked about this in the past, Mark Ellis, who is a judge of the 351st on that death penalty case, recommended relief be granted. We're going to give kudos, of course, to our DA, Chuck Rosenthal, who agreed with that. But in this particular case, I don't think that the proof of his mental retardation was nearly as clear. It just was interesting reading it and looking at that very scary picture they put in the paper every day, and then looking at the pictures of the guy on TV. How much we're influenced by the way somebody appears, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah, well, the pictures of him showed him looking like a real scary gang character.
He was scary looking.
Well, Cindy, we have about a minute left. Something I'm going to do, at the end of our show, there are credits, and they give Cindy's both her phone number and email address as well as mine, and we never really emphasize telling people this, but if you have questions or ideas or something you want to ask us or some input you want to give us, email us or write us.
That's true. And also, I think we mentioned before, if you have an idea for someone for a guest, we're willing to. Dan and I are always trying to chase people down to be guests because people's time is very valuable.
People love to be on Reasonable Doubt if we'll give them a call, though. It's time to wrap it up. Good night. Cindy, we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you and good night.
I used to be a yes man with no future. I used to be a cog on some big wheel. Inequities of every sort I endured, and so I caught myself